This is Metro Week. In this episode, the first in a series looking at Southern Arizona's congressional races.
Taxes should be fair and they should be apportioned correctly. But we need to, the way you do budgeting is you set your priorities. And then you build your taxes around that.
We have highlights from a debate in the 1st Congressional District.
Congresswoman Kirkpatrick has never cut a nickel out of the big budget. We're $17 trillion in the hole. Here in Arizona, we can't print money. I know that Washington doesn't understand that.
Then we break down the race and review the week's news with our Journalists Roundtable.
I'm Christopher Conover in for Andrea Kelly. Arizona's Congressional District 1 is the 10th largest in the nation. It stretches from northern Pima County to the Utah line. It has more Native American residents than any other district in the United States. The voter registration makes it highly competitive, with Democrats having a slight numeric advantage. Democratic Congresswoman Ann Kirkpatrick is the incumbent. She's hoping to win her 3rd term in office. The Arizona native lists her priorities as job creation, protection of entitlements, building of infrastructure, and funding education. Republican challenger Andy Tobin is Speaker of the Arizona House of Representatives. The son of a New York City police officer wants to repeal the Affordable Care Act, create jobs, reduce the national debt, and secure the border. The candidates took part in a debate with Ted Simons at our sister station KAET in Phoenix. Here's an excerpt.
Let's start with a couple of ads that we have seen on both sides quite a bit. We'll start with you, Congresswoman. The Democratic Congressional Committee ad blames Andy Tobin for cuts to Arizona education, for cuts to child protective services. Do you agree with those ads?
I do, and I know Mr. Tobin touts that he's been able to cut the state budget, but there's a right and wrong way to do that. Education is very important, and as I said, I have a vision for Arizona of a diversified, stable economy, and talking with business leaders, we have to improve our education system. That's not a place where we should have cut. And so it's critical to businesses that want to come into Arizona and locate here that we have good schools. That's what they're looking for.
Can it be argued, though, that he was also Speaker when CPS was overhauled and the attendant funding was approved?
That happened as well. However, he was Speaker when they cut the budget and cut the CPS budget, and that's the problem. The problem is that there's a way to do budgeting where you set your priorities, but don't do it on the backs of vulnerable children.
I want you to respond to this, and then we'll get to the Republican ad, please.
Oh, that's fine. The answer is Congresswoman Kirkpatrick has never cut a nickel out of the big budget. We're $17 trillion in the hole. Here in Arizona, we can't print money. I know that Washington doesn't understand that. The Arizona School Board Association, when I was vice chairman of the K-12 committee, named me Legislator of the Year. The School Superintendents Association named me Legislator of the Year. The School for the Deaf and Blind named me Legislator of the Year. So I have to share with you that as you're going through this process, there is give and take. And when we really needed revenue, I'm a Republican. You watched this debate that we had in the primary. I supported Prop 100. I got slaughtered for supporting Prop 100. I was out there working on getting a tax issue to the voters so that we can bring in more revenue to save schools. But that wasn't the only one. Coconino Community College. We went ahead and tried to help them as well. So as you look towards this record where they talk about Andy Tobin doesn't like education, I have 5 kids graduated from high school and public school, community college, all went to community college. These are critical to our community. So,
okay,
but you have to live in a budget. You have to have a budget
Let me just address
somewhere.
a piece of that. I mean, actually, the deficit has gone down 60%. It's on track this year to be the lowest it's been since 2008. And so the Great Recession was tough. And it really was about getting people back to work. But we're going in the direction of deficit reduction, and we've made huge strides.
The Republican ad, National Committee ad, shows a couple of women's legs. I'm assuming they were representing Congresswoman Kirkpatrick, saying that she's carrying baggage, toting luggage for President Obama, Nancy Pelosi. You agree with that ad?
Well, I don't like the videos anyway. I just assume we go from town to town and have a debate in everybody's town rather than play this thing on the TV. But I think it's clear that Congresswoman Kirkpatrick stands with President Obama. And I think that's part of the critical crisis that we're going through in rural Arizona today. You know, Congresswoman Kirkpatrick voted to close Gitmo, which means we're looking at putting terrorists on U.S. soil. I mean, that is not rural Arizona. That is an absurd decision to make so that these people come here. And today our young folks are fighting in a war somewhere else. We didn't even have a strategy a month ago.
Toting the President and Nancy Pelosi's baggage.
Well, let me first say that those aren't my high heels, these are my boots. So I want your viewers to see that these are actually the real thing. And I actually have one of the most independent records of a member of Congress because I always put my district first. And I'll give you an example of that. My district has 4 coal-fired plants, and I've been fighting with the EPA since 2009 when all of Arizona's congressional delegation signed on to a letter saying, you know, back off. And we continue to fight that battle. Even today, APS and SRP put out a statement really acknowledging my fight against the EPA. And so that's an example of bucking my party. But look, Ted, Congressional District 1 is extremely diverse, and anyone who toes the party line can't represent that district well.
The fact that she has worked with Representative Gosar on forest health, on the I don't know if the Blue Ridge Reservoir was with Gosar, but I know you work with that as well. The Superior Copper Mine, is that a partisan?
Well, I don't think those are partisan, but Congresswoman Kirkpatrick, but it's not just Gitmo. I have listed, I call it the 10 Commandments, but I think there's 15 of them. You're never ending record voting with Nancy Pelosi. Your own colleagues here in Arizona disagreed with you and voted differently than you did on a lot of these issues. When you said you can change your plan, your Obamacare plan, then you voted not to let them change it, or you could keep it. Then you said they can't keep it. You know, we're trying to figure out exactly who this is that's representing us, because if you go up to where you just voted no to allow Cholla to close 1/3, and the argument is oh, well, you know, APS and SRP, they know I'm battling for them. That's not true. I mean, they're fighting negotiations with a gun to their head, and all of a sudden they're like, well, we're going to help.
Let's let her respond.
Sure,
Yeah,
let's
no,
do that.
I mean, it is true. I put my district first, and you're right. Congressman Gosar and I are working very well together on a number of Arizona-specific things. And your viewers may remember that he's the gentleman who beat me in 2010. After the 2012 election, because he ran in a different district, we're both in Congress together, and we represent most of rural Arizona. So we are working on projects like a transportation corridor called the I-11. We are working together on the Resolution Copper Mine issue. This year we had good success working together on a subdivision outside of Flagstaff where there had been an erroneous survey. It's called Mountain Air, and we're actually able to get that bill signed into law and make a real difference for real people in the district.
As far as back to the idea of education cuts and CPS and this sort of thing, critics say you voted to cut over $1 billion from Arizona schools. Are they wrong?
Well, I think you have to argue that while you're cutting dollars, what are you replacing them with? And I think if you look back on what we were left with after Congresswoman Kirkpatrick left here and left us in the hole, then we have to come and resurrect. So, Ted, as I mentioned before, where are you going to get the money if you can't print it like they can in Washington, D.C.? We can't print it here. So the answer is, yes, you make the cuts, but then you look for revenue. We borrowed on the building. How many times did I get beat up for borrowing on the buildings to prevent further cuts into the K-12 system? You know, my daughter wants to be a teacher. She wants to go teach math. That's where she wants to go. Of course, our family is huge on supporting education. I stood there with my own Chino Valley High School District and supported their bond issue. And with Coconino Community College, I hear you, with Coconino Community College, on their bond issue, I paid my own money and put a letter in to their tax guide. So that's putting your money where your mouth is and supporting.
What we really need to be focused on is jobs. You know, Arizona's unemployment rate is higher than the national unemployment. And we really need to build that diversified, stable economy in Arizona. How do we do that? I'm on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, and one of the big successes last year out of Congress was passing the Water Resources Reform and, Water Resources Development Act called WRDA. And in that, we were able to get funding for 3 really important projects in Congressional District 1. And so that was the Winslow Levee, the Rio de Flag and Flagstaff, and the Lower Santa Cruz River Flood Mitigation Plan. So we know a lot about flooding recently because we had those horrific rains not too long ago.
You mentioned jobs, though.
Yes,
and there are those who say that to get jobs, you need to stimulate the economy, and to stimulate the economy, you need to cut taxes. Do you agree?
I do not agree. And I agree that taxes should be fair and they should be apportioned correctly. But we need to, the way you do budgeting is you set your priorities. And then you build your taxes around that. So we need to make Arizona a business-friendly state so that we can attract businesses. But it's not just tax cuts. It's building up our infrastructure, and that includes building up our schools. And we've got to really focus on that and having good paying schools.
The idea that tax cuts leads to a stronger economy. We've had tax cuts for years here in Arizona, and our jobless rate is lagging the national average. What's going on here?
Well, it's lagging the national average because Washington's got their foot on our throat, is what's going on.
Explain.
Well, look at what the EPA does to our businesses. Look at the coal mines. Look what's happening there. And Congresswoman Kirkpatrick talks about the Resolution Copper Mine, but Harry Reid won't move it off of his desk. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it's still Washington that steps on.
I'm sorry, you're completely wrong because, it's your policies that businesses are looking at. And let me just outline those. You're opposed to immigration reform, comprehensive immigration reform.
That's never true.
You slammed through the House of Representatives the very discriminatory bill 1062, which almost cost us the Super Bowl. Well, and those gave Arizona a black eye. Yeah. And then you refused to provide the funding for our most vulnerable children and for education and building good schools. That's what businesses look at if they're going to come to Arizona. Yeah.
Well, I think it's for someone to first say, yes, we're in trouble, and yet we have to have a balanced way of doing things, who has never balanced a budget in Washington. I mean, I don't think the president's brought one to the White House. I think they got one passed. When Ann Kirkpatrick was in the legislature or in the Congress the first time, if they wanted immigration reform, they had the House, they had the Senate, they had the White House. They could have passed everything they wanted, but they didn't. Our corporate tax rate is so abysmally high. We are driving businesses out of our country, Why would you, Ted, come to Page, Arizona and invest there if you're thinking they're closing down 1/3 of that coal mine? 1/3. Why would you go to Winslow or Holbrook? Ann Kirkpatrick supports what the EPA does.
I do
she
not.
doesn't stand there and fight back.
You are absolutely wrong about
Congresswoman,
that.
just last week you went ahead and voted. Just last week.
Yes, let me talk about that bill
last week. Okay, good, because there's about 4 more.
That was a bill that was a composite of 11 pieces of legislation we had already passed out of the House. And there were some I agreed with and some I disagreed with. For example, one of the things I disagreed with is it completely eliminated any kind of environmental regulations. That goes too far. One of the things I did vote for was protecting coal mining jobs because this district has a coal mine. But it's about balancing the competing interests.
The idea of voting against or for a bill that is full of other things. How far do you go when you say someone's for or against individual things?
Well, then drop your own bill and say, hey, here's my bill to stop the EPA. That's not what's going on. What's going on is the EPA.
You missed the point. We had already voted on those.
Let him finish, please.
But you never dropped a bill before this one to say stop. Where's that bill? When you can go back to Washington and says, Mr. EPA, let's say you are going to clean up all our air. Instead of sitting there and dumping the bill on the Arizona citizen, why don't you go fund that? Ann Kirkpatrick,
why don't you
actions,
go fund that? Not your
yeah,
words.
I'd love to because you haven't passed any. You don't have any action.
No,
when you
of course
can.
I do. Of course I do. Let me talk about my record because I have one of the most successful records of a member of Congress. So I had 7 bills in my first term that were passed into law. This term I've had 3 that are signed into law, and I'm in the minority. The first one was the VA Corps, which streamlined the veterans claims process. That was signed into law in December of last year. I talked about the Mountain Air bill that Mr. Gosar and I worked on together, which was signed into law in May of this year. And then most recently, we did the most comprehensive reform of the Veterans Administration since 1999. Done all of that work in a bipartisan way, reaching across the aisle and coming to consensus.
Last point on this. You have described Congresswoman Kirkpatrick's record in Congress as, quote, disastrous.
Yes, it is disastrous.
How?
I just explained. You have the EPA. She sits on the Veterans Committee, and she sits on transportation. Can anybody have believed growing up in this country that the VA would have collapsed like they did under her watch? I can't. But my point is that fixing problems after they've already happened is like the president's strategy that he never had. Oh, let's go in and let's do something now. So they're behind the cart. They're just reacting. They're not leading. They're reacting to something.
But Mr. Tobin, you slammed through the legislature this very discriminatory bill, Senate Bill 1062, that almost cost us the Super Bowl. Thank heavens the governor vetoed it.
Well, Aunt Kirkpatrick, you didn't say a word about that bill the year before when she vetoed it because the budget hadn't passed. And I agree that more debate should have happened on that bill, but this time the governor was at the table. All the senators, the Republican senators, all voted
Well,
against.
I just want to say your record and your policies are not good for Congressional District 1.
Oh, good.
And
We got to get moving.
Okay.
I want to get back to immigration. I know we've touched on it a little bit, but as
Great.
far as immigration is concerned, the Gang of Eight bill coming from the Senate, if you were in the House right now, would you vote for it?
No, I would not.
Why
It
not?
is a pathway to citizenship that I've totally disagreed with it. Our border is not secure. The triggers in there come after the fact. You can't sit across the table from this president, shake his hand, and believe he's going to tell you the truth when he says he's going to secure the border. It isn't going to happen. Ann Kirkpatrick's record on border security, time and time again, even in her record in the state legislature, so we knew this was going to happen going forward, is also abysmal. It's securing the border gives you an opportunity to then move forward.
Define securing the border.
I think we have to have our governor's panel sit there and work with the border patrol and say, here's what a secure peace looks like. Because if you send it back to Washington to have this conversation, you'll be 20 years still there worrying about whose pie is going to get gored.
The idea of the Senate bill, Republicans in the House are saying, forget comprehensive reform, go in stages, go piecemeal, if you will. Is that a bad idea?
I support the comprehensive immigration reform bill that was negotiated by our senators. They were very active in that. It has strong resources for securing the border. But let me just say that the border will be secure when the people who live on the border feel that it's secure. And I talk with ranchers on a regular basis down there about what's going on. And they tell me, Ann, look, you've got to do comprehensive immigration reform. There are two pieces of this. I'm a former prosecutor. And there's the criminal element that's coming across, and I have zero tolerance for that. But there's an economic piece. And we have a lot of farmers in this congressional district who rely on guest workers to come and help them in their fields. And they support comprehensive immigration reform.
How do you work that balance to get the labor that business says it needs and also eliminate the pathway to citizenship, as you say?
Well, you have to have will. You have to secure the border and say this is how it works. When the Democrats were all in charge, they didn't think that was a problem, or they would have secured the border and then moved forward on immigration reform. That hasn't happened. So now it comes to Congress where they're battling over, okay, how does this work and can this happen? If you took citizenship off the table, I will bet you that bill would have already passed. But they can't seem to do that.
Hi, I'm Lorraine Rivera. Join me next on Arizona Week for a nationwide effort to reach female voters.
A man with a young family, it's like, okay, that's normal, he's running for Congress. A woman with a younger family, it's like, well, why is she leaving them at home? Isn't that awful? She's not a good mother. Well, she is a great mother. She cares about the future of this country.
We're back with our Journalist Roundtable. Joining me this week are Fernanda Chavarri of Arizona Public Media, Becky Pollock of the Arizona Daily Star, and Thelma Grimes of Tucson Local Media. Ladies, thank you so much for sitting down with us. Fernanda, we've just watched the candidates in Congressional District 1 talk about a variety of issues. We ended on immigration. Let's broaden that topic out a little bit. You've done a lot of reporting this year and even this week here on our radio side on immigration. What role is immigration playing in statewide politics this year?
I found out after interviewing somebody from the Pima County Democratic Party and then the Republican Party that it actually depends on who you ask. somebody in the Democratic Party, Vince Rabago, said that immigration is actually in the back burner this time around, that people in Arizona are a little bit fed up and that it's playing less of a role in Arizona than it is in other states. However, Bruce Ash from the Republican National Committeeman in Arizona said that immigration is still a really crucial issue, and it has shifted from border security and anti-illegal immigration laws, especially here in Arizona, to sort of the humanitarian side of immigration. With the influx of unaccompanied children that we had this summer, up until August, we had more than 60,000 children that were caught apprehended crossing the border illegally into the U.S. And so that sort of highlighted the human side. You're looking at the faces of children when you're talking about immigration. And also here in Arizona this time around, we've had 4 sanctuary cases in Arizona, 3 of them here in Tucson, of people who are living in the country illegally, and to avoid deportation, they seek sanctuary inside churches. So that conversation of immigration has sort of shifted to be a little more on the human side of immigration, as opposed to the just border enforcement, border security and enforcement.
And that shift is something we've really seen over the last 2 years, not just in our local races, but nationally. It seems like we've gone from border security to immigration, and the two are not always meshing.
And if you think back to 2010, that's when SB 1070 was sort of the highlight and the topic of conversation in immigration. In 2010 was very much anti-illegal immigration, especially in Arizona. Then you move on to 2012, and it was how do we beef up border security and get more Border Patrol agents on the ground. And now, yes, that continues to be part of the conversation, as we heard in the piece that we just watched from the Congressional District 1 debate. But it has, when we are talking about securing the border, we're talking about also the people who are already here. So it has shifted a little bit in the last, I would say, 3 or 4 election cycles.
In talking how it shifted a little bit, when you say this year too, the more we're hearing, you hear Republicans talk jobs, and the economy has been brought up, but I'm hearing both sides bring up how immigration fits in. Like Ann said in the piece, we need the immigration for our businesses. Business owners are saying that helps them, and then you have Republicans saying no border security. So how has that played out in this election cycle?
If you look at who wants immigration reform, it is such a broad spectrum. Labor rights groups are pushing for immigration reform, as well as people in the business community and people here locally who want to be able to pay immigrants the right way, and who say that doing it that way and immigrants who are here illegally paying taxes would bring money into the economy. So I think that the two continue to be very tied, the economy and immigration. However, if you talk to some Republicans, all of that comes after securing the border, and that answer changes depending on who you ask. Some people say the border is as secure as it's ever been, and other people say that we need more border security, but they can't quite specify what it is that we need to secure the border.
And there's a bill in Congress right now regarding immigration reform, correct?
There is the bill, the Senate bill, that the Gang of Eight,
Right.
which McCain and Flake were part of the drafting of. It passed the Senate. It's moved over to the House, but at this point, the House has not taken it up, and there are questions about whether they take
Right. Okay.
the entire bill or break it apart. And of course, now they're all back in the district, so they won't be back. This is something we won't see until after the election. And let's talk a little more, Becky, about drilling into this election, especially CD1 this week. Money, always an issue in campaigns. We've just wrapped up the last fundraising quarter, the reports that we all get to see before the election. How are things looking in this race? Historically, Andy Tobin has been behind Ann Kirkpatrick.
Yes, and he probably still is, coming out of a very difficult primary election season. Ann Kirkpatrick has raised a total of $2.7 million. Thelma, you were just saying she had a good quarter.
Yes, she mentioned this morning an $800,000 collection, so that report should be coming out soon.
And we'll have more specifics on who gave what money to which candidate in a couple of weeks.
And again, this will be the last one we'll see, the last big report we'll see before the election. So what do these numbers mean when it comes to convincing our viewers, your readers, our listeners, the voters out there?
Well, in this race, we're definitely seeing a lot of attack ads. National party groups are coming in with big money. Outside spending is really big in this race. The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee put in about $2.5 million already, and the Republican group has spent a similar amount. So you're going to be seeing a lot of attack ads on TV, and you're going to be seeing these groups paying for ads saying, support our candidate.
And Ann Kirkpatrick, in that excerpt we saw, made reference to one of those ads, the now infamous luggage ad with the woman's legs, which was done by Outside. So.
That's right, and some groups are pointing to that ad and saying it's one of the most sexist ads in this campaign cycle. Ann Kirkpatrick tried to turn it around for herself by focusing on some cowgirl boots that she bought when she was a teenager. And now you see Republicans trying to turn that back again to themselves, saying, well, our members of Congress have their boots on our throats, stepping on our rights and things like that.
New poll out today shows Andy Tobin up by 6 points. Some have questioned that, including the Kirkpatrick campaign, as we come into the end of the race.
Yes, the poll showed Andy Tobin with a 6-point lead over Ann Kirkpatrick, but with a 5% margin of error in that poll. Really what we conclude is this is a very close race. All the leading political groups are calling it a toss-up. The Democrats' main criticism of the poll was that it didn't include enough Native Americans, who are as much as 25% of the voters in this district. It's a very diverse district, very large district. So it's kind of a wait-and-see race.
Are we seeing them? We have just the very southern tip of the district with Marana, Oro Valley, Saddlebrook. Are we seeing them down here? Thelma, I know that also gets up into your readership area in the Northwest. Are we seeing the candidates a lot down here?
You can correct me if I'm wrong. I've not seen them a lot, but they will be in a debate on the 14th up here. And the Marana Chamber as well as the Oro Valley Chamber is hosting that. But you know, like she brought up, Native Americans are a huge part of that district. It's the 10th largest district in the nation. It's got the highest percentage of Native Americans. So a lot of their focus is on that.
Let's, Thelma, stay up in the northwest part of our area, the southern part of the district. What are the issues that are important to the voters in that area?
I think some of the issues that are important, immigration is one of them, especially with the children coming in, and you know they wanted to place some in Oracle, and there was also some on Oracle Road that were placed this year. But the other issues that are brought up a lot are the bases. Keeping Fort Huachuca open, even though it's not in the district, is important with jobs. And then the A-10 issue. I think those are huge issues for Southern Arizona as a whole.
Do the voters differ? Of course, we have a rural and a metro area, but this district is so spread out. Do the needs of the voters differ in this district as we go from south to north in this case?
I would say when it comes to the military bases, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, I would say that's where we're different. But then I think the core issues, Veterans Affairs, immigration, all of those are the same across the board, except for when you take the Native American side. Their issues are probably a little different. So.
And then Obamacare and Medicaid has been a big issue in this race, which is important to people in a lot of different areas. And as we heard in the debate, both candidates are questioning the recent decisions by the EPA. That's more of a northern Arizona issue that we're not going to hear about as much in southern Arizona.
Right. They brought up coal mining, that kind of thing. You know, we don't always follow that up here as much. And I think she brought up the Obamacare issue as well, that I think is just going to be an issue across the board.
Do you hear from your readers in the Northwest, Becky, your readers in the Northwest? We heard this some 2 years ago when this district was unveiled, that we have nothing in common with the Native Americans in the north part of the state, Flagstaff and some of the rural areas. Do we still hear that 2 years later from voters on the ground?
I think from some of the voters who still believe the way the district boundaries were written, divided up, they still disagree with how it is, and they think it's an unfair advantage for the Democratic candidates per se. But I can't say it's as much an issue as it was when Kirkpatrick went against Jonathan Payton a couple years ago.
It's one of the factors that makes this a really tough district to poll. There's so many different kinds of voters. You've got urban areas, rural areas, tribal areas, a lot of independent voters in this district. And again, different issues are more important to different areas of the district. It's tough to get a sense of what voters are thinking.
And it's got to be tough on the candidate who do we go after and who do we aim at, especially when you're coming down to the time where independents and undecideds matter as much.
Well, exactly. We have early ballots going out in really just a week, which means people can start voting in about 7 days. Becky, as we wrap this up with about a minute to go, you cover other races. This isn't the only one you cover. How does this one differ, or how is it the same as the other races here in southern Arizona?
Well, it's a close race and a big money race, similar to the Ron Barber and Martha McSally race in Congressional District 2. In Congressional District 3, we see Raul Grijalva with a lead over Gabriela Saucedo Mercer. So it varies. It's interesting.
And a reminder to all our viewers, if you want to watch this debate again, you can always go to our website, news.azpm.org. That is a wrap for this week. For more on this story, including those that air on our sister station, NPR 89.1, go to our website, news.azpm.org. Now, Arizona Week looks at the candidates' efforts to reach female voters this year.